Hello and welcome to the Beyond Biotech podcast number 53. I'm Jim Cornell from the Biotech and we're already into July, so Canada Day and July the 4th have both come and gone. And of course all the press releases dry up around the 4th as well. Today is July the 7th, or 7-7, which is World Chocolate Day. It's also Macaroni Day, although presumably not in the same bowl. And it's also Solomon Islands Day, so hello to all of our listeners in Honiara. Well, there might be. Not sure what biotech companies there are in the Solomons, and I've not been there, although I wouldn't say no if the government there is offering. Having said that, for fun, I just searched getting there, and it's about 36 hours of flying, 2 stopovers in Dubai for 10 hours and Brisbane for 2, and it's more than $3,000. So, unless someone else is paying, then it's not looking good. I think the longest ever flight I took was more than 20 years ago when I flew from Eastern Canada to Tasmania. And I think it was Halifax to Boston to LA to Sydney and then Sydney to Hobart. But this was in January and there was a snowstorm which meant that Boston Airport was closed. So it ended up being Halifax to Montreal, Montreal to Minneapolis, Minneapolis to New York, New York to Atlanta, Atlanta to LA, LA to Sydney, and then finally Hobart. It took about 2 calendar days, and to add insult to injury, my bags ended up taking 2 more days. And of course, this was pre-smartphones and iPads for entertainment, so you can tell how bad it was. I even read the in-flight magazines. It's now the school holidays here, which means travel and hotel prices just went up. It's funny how that happens. And that's not even a reflection of the inflation that seems to be hitting many places at the moment, but I won't even go there. At least the podcast is free. Speaking of the podcast, today we're talking ADCs. And ADC has a few meanings like analog to digital converter, something that I'm familiar with in music. In fact, I found more than 100 acronyms for ADC, but obviously the one we're talking about today is the Arkansas Department of Corrections. No, it's antibody-drug conjugates, and the conversation we have for you today on antibody-drug conjugates is with Pejvack Motlagh, who was recently announced as the Chief Medical Officer at Mablink Bioscience. And so now it's time for the news you may have missed over at Labiotech.eu. A new osteoarthritis treatment for horses could work for humans. We had an article on whether we're getting closer to a cure for hepatitis B. And Excellium Biosciences has closed €24 million financing for its lead candidate. A new drug helps prostate cancer patients. Camina Bioscience has raised $10 million for its DNA synthesis platform. And we had an article on 6 biotech spinouts you should watch out for this year. A narcolepsy drug has been approved in China. We had our monthly roundup of the biggest financing rounds globally, and an article looking at 6 biotech companies in Hong Kong. A £100 million Life Arc program aims to help people living with rare diseases. AstraZeneca's non-small cell lung cancer drug met its primary endpoint, and positive data have come out of Sensorion's hearing loss study. We had an article on cultivated meat, the FDA has approved an Alzheimer's treatment, and Swedish researchers are looking to peptides to destroy viruses. Tolerogenics has expanded its Phase 2 immune tolerance trial, and you can read these, and many more, at Labiotech.eu. And that means we're into today's interview on antibody-drug conjugates. And, as usual, that means letting the expert take it from here. And this week that expert is Pejvack Motlagh, who was recently announced as the Chief Medical Officer at Mablink Bioscience. To get things started, maybe you could tell me a little bit about your background and your transition to the new company.
Absolutely. So my name is Pejvack Motlagh. As I'm a physician, I joined the industry 20 years ago. and I evolved in various positions. I think the most important, for today's discussions is over 12 years dedicated to oncology in the industry. And I started at GSK, leading their early clinical development of cancer vaccines, a very innovative and interesting approach at that times, and a lot of learnings there that helped us also, throughout my career. I then moved to BMS, Bristol Myers Squibb, where I had more medical affair and helping them really launching, the revolution of the checkpoint inhibitors. So it was about Nivo, EP, and their combinations. So it was really about, the pre-launch activities and launch activities, medical affairs, and a very, I would say, extraordinary time where we had, all those approvals, in something like 10 or 12 indications in just a couple of years. That was, really impressive. So everybody knows about, the impact of the checkpoint inhibitors and immunotherapies. I then joined AstraZeneca as a global clinical lead, where I also had the extending my knowledge to more late phase compounds, and also about the transition and the line of sight in terms of development of a couple of their part of their oncology portfolio. And my last job was at Boehringer Ingelheim, where I was privileged to lead their global clinical development teams in immuno-oncology, and overseeing and managing their growing IO portfolio that was really composed of many assets, many modalities, cancer vaccines, oncolytic viruses, T-cell engagers, checkpoint inhibitors, you can name them, and against multiple targets, and then developed mostly in solid tumors.
I wonder if you could tell me a little bit about what prompted you to make the switch to Mablink.
Very important point. I think that there is really two aspects. One that is more personal, and maybe I will less develop this, but really, I would say a feeling and a motivation to join maybe a more human size and very highly motivated team. That's something we can also discuss, or bringing all this knowledge and experience from big pharma to a much smaller organization, but at the same time being very much more focused. And I think the other layer is that physician, people is really at the center of everything I do, and of course this is something that is important in larger companies, but also in smaller ones. Maybe the difference is sometimes there is more a homogeneous approach, there is more focus. That's also sometimes the challenge of having various compounds, which one to prioritize, and on top of that, everything related to the size. So I think that's really the mix of both. So the intent of doing something that is really, bringing a true innovation to the patients. The other one is maybe the right time, also to the lead myself, and also, taking all the decisions, in a smaller, company.
Could you tell me a little bit about what Mablink does and what stage the company's
Sure.
at with its pipeline?
So Mablink Bioscience is a biotechnology company dedicated to advancing cancer therapy with their next generation antibody-drug conjugates, ADCs. So this is a preclinical stage, company, but of course, with my arrival, we are putting everything set for first time in human next year in 2024.
We're going to be talking more today about antibody-drug conjugates. I wonder if you could kind of just give a little bit of an overview of
Sure.
that field, when it started, what the development has been,
Of
and
course.
what it's used for.
So very basically, ADCs, as you know, consist in three components. So there is an antibody that targets the tumor-associated antigen of interest. There is a potent cytotoxic drug that we call the payload. And finally, there is a linker that connects the antibody and the drug through a chemical bond. ADCs combine the favorable pharmacokinetics profile and tumor targeting properties of antibodies and at the same time with the potent cell-killing activity of an attached warhead, which results in a more precise delivery of cytotoxic drugs to the tumor. And finally, ADCs are among the fastest growing drug classes in oncology. And this is also something that I maybe missed to say is that, the attraction specific to this class. So very interestingly about the ADCs that, currently there are something like 13 FDA approved ADCs, and roughly half of them are approved for solid tumor cancer, and the other half are approved for hematological malignancies. But ADCs are not new. They have been on the market for over a decade. However, the majority of ADCs have been approved within the last 5 years. So this is an important point showing the recent technological breakthrough, and we can think that the best is still to come. So there is clearly a huge potential with this approach, and then of course specifically with, I would say, our platform and with our technology.
What are the advantages of using ADCs?
It's really about, I know that recently you had a podcast on precision medicine. I think that even myself previously there was this thinking of immuno-oncology on one side, targeted therapies on the other. I think that I moved a lot from those approaches and then the various modalities. I think that we are sharing, the same targets and things are getting more blurry, between, T-cell engagers or ADCs. And my way of seeing things is really about, the new axis that is really a trend that is on increasing precision. ADCs are very, high in terms of, the precisions, that we are looking for, and really about, again, targeting a very specific antigen of interest and bringing a variety of cytotoxic drugs. And is really about the potential, again, is to better pair the payload mechanism with the tumor and the target biology. So it's really about that.
Right. And what are the challenges around using ADCs?
So one of the key challenges of ADCs is really managing the what we call the hydrophobicity. Again, one step back, the primary goal is really to improve the what we call the therapeutic index of chemotherapeutics agents. And really, again, the focus of ADCs is restricting their systemic delivery to cells that express the antigen targeted by the antibody bearing the drug. So again, the primary goal is really to improve this therapeutic index, and that is really between the minimum efficacious dose and the maximum tolerated dose. And we know that, that's a classical issue in all our developments. A narrow therapeutic index, brings only major issues in terms of development of new drugs. So for ADCs in peculiar, and I would say that this hydrophobicity is really, one of the key challenges is related to the cytotoxic drugs used. And hydrophobicity is a key parameter, is correlated to faster clearance, so shorter half-life. So if you have a lower drug exposure, you can expect a lower efficacy and a lower tolerability because of the saturation of clearance and healthy tissues. So the approach of Mablink is really about, their own technology, what we call the PSARLink platform, that is a unique stealth technology that masks the hydrophobicity of the cytotoxic drugs by adding a polysarcosine chain to the linker. And please don't ask me any more questions, and then I will need our CSO. But the whole idea is that thanks, to this protection, this covering, this masks, the PSARLink technology solutions the hydrophobicity issue, and it improves dramatically the therapeutic index. At the end, we are reaching for and expecting a better pharmacokinetic profile, higher drug exposure, leading to higher anti-tumor efficacy, a lower clearance rate that will improve the tolerability. And so in one word, more hydrophilic ADCs, and we can expect better tolerated ADCs.
You mentioned that it's relatively new. How has it evolved, and is it continuing to evolve?
Absolutely. So, you all heard about, AACR 2023 and more recently ASCO. I will not, come back to that. You really see that there is an explosion in terms of, first of all, a confirmation with, the leading, new generation ADCs on the market. And there is also a boom in terms of clinical development. And you can see that from the recent years, there is also clearly an attraction in this field and an acceleration in terms of clinical development, all phases, included.
Where is the field at right now? You mentioned some of the ones that have been approved and that are in use. What kind of results are we seeing from those?
So again, here there is, many things to share. I think that the striking, news that we have seen is really, extending the sensitivity also of the approach. So meaning that, you can, more specifically talking about the HER2 target, for which, we have seen that the new drugs recently approved are able to increase to the lower expressors. And that's, I think, a very striking, point, leading also to some, I would say, agnostic approach that we have seen also in the very recent, data presented. So no more linked to a specific tumor indication, but more on the target. So very exciting news. And again, showing that we are really at the beginning of many improvements.
Yeah, absolutely. It seems to be something that's primarily used in cancer. Does it have other applications as well? And if so, why is it more being tailored to cancer?
It's a more personal, answers, I would say. As I said, I was working, extensively in immuno-oncology and so really about targeting the immune system. And as you know, there is a very thin frontier with, inflammation and also autoimmune diseases. So there was always this aspect that, what we are achieving in oncology could also, help in other therapeutic areas. And I think the same with ADCs. Again, the technology could be one of the attraction and the key, attraction for me was the versatility of the platform. And then at the same time, the personalization of the platform. So you can really think, in the future on any, specific target. And then we can also extend, the kind of payloads. Of course, linked to that, again, a very versatile tool that could be possibly used, in other indications and on other, therapeutic areas. Yes, for sure. But for the moment, there is still a lot to do in the cancer field.
Is there an influence of cost on the use of ADCs?
Again, I think that is a bit early, and then we will see with the multiplication. But I think it's a no-brainer that, as I mentioned, when you have a technology that brings simpler, better manufacturing processes, you can expect that also, that could be, with the multiplication extensions and an impact, maybe on prices. But again, I think those questions are a little bit premature for the moment. As a chief medical officer, I would say that, for the most important part is really to show the benefit, the improvement in terms of benefit risk for the patients, having a very clear efficacy, that what we can expect from ADCs. And that's also, a very important point. Somehow ADCs work or not. There is not much gray areas, and that's also very important. So once we have a potent efficacy, then we can see the impact, I would say, not only on the patients, but also on the, I would say, the healthcare providers, the cost on the society, but everything is going on the same direction.
I guess the same would probably be true of regulation then?
Absolutely.
Are there any adverse effects to the use of antibody-drug conjugates?
Yes, we know that, all effective drugs as of today have also a specific, toxicity and safety profile, and ADCs are the same. But here again, the intent is to improve, and to having to reach better safety profile, in the future. And we also learn from some, I would say, known and ADCs on the market. But the whole idea is really, to increase not only the efficacy but also the tolerability versus previous generation. Clearly, we can expect also, I would say, a better safety profile in the future.
And I guess one of the things that seems to be true of other kinds of medicine as well is that you have certain people respond to a drug much differently than others do. Is this the same with ADCs?
We are coming back to maybe this discussion about precision medicines and coming from immuno-oncology. Mostly in the past, where there was still, this a distinction between targeted therapies and immuno-oncology approaches. I think that, things are much more blurred today. Again, the targets are usually the same. It's just the technology, the payload, etc., that is somehow different. And the way I see, the classification is more on one axis, that is really this trend on increasing precision. And on this axis, you can expect that systemic chemotherapeutic approach are really, very low, and then you are increasing and increasing with in the middle of this ladder you have checkpoint inhibitors, you have vaccines, and then higher, then you are going to the monoclonal antibodies, and then ADCs are quite high, I would say, in this ladder of increasing precisions approach. So answering to your question, we can expect more precision medicine approach, that the patients that are having, those targets will respond. And again, one of the very nice thing about, the ADCs is that we know that the concept now is working. There is, approved drugs. So somehow, the concept is validated, and we can expect very clearly good efficacy and an increase in efficacy. Otherwise, the compound is not effective. Patients, should respond, and at least that's really the expectation.
And is it more useful in conjunction with other treatments?
At a larger, view on the oncology, I always been a strong believer that, a combinational approach is very important. And I think that even more in the future, you will see also sequential approach that is very important. So really how to use and when to use a drug A and a drug B and a drug C. And it's not only A plus B and even A plus B per C, but it's also the sequence of those drugs that could, improve drastically, I would say, the response, the efficacy, and also to manage the toxicity. I think that this is clearly, a very strong trend in oncology.
We've seen, I guess, since the early 2000s, they've been in use and more and more approvals. How do you see the field developing over the next little while?
I think that there was a very exciting, couple of decades. Again, I mentioned, early the striking approach of immunotherapeutics, validated as really was a game changer. Since then, we have cell therapies also. So there is a lot of, modalities, new modalities, and so that's great for the patients. I think that we are now more in a consolidation phase. As I said, is really about thinking more about improving some of those technologies, and like ADCs, and really thinking about how to really, touch more and more patients, as you mentioned, previously. And again, one clear, information is immunotherapeutics, can have a really profound and great benefit for the patients. But after, a decade of use, we know that, this is only touching 1/5 to, I would say, 1/4 of the patient population. So there is a lot of unmet medical need out there, and this is also true for many approaches, not only immunotherapeutics. So there is a lot of room for improvement. And that's the reason why, there is still, a lot of room for advancing new technologies like ADCs or others.
And as far as the companies that are involved, we've seen some of the big names like AstraZeneca and GSK, Astellas, been involved. How do you think that will play out? Do you think that there will be more companies get involved, or do you think the bigger companies will dominate the scene? How do you see that?
So again, clearly there is a very strong attraction. We have seen several, striking deals, recently, not to mention, Seagen, and even more recently. And I think that that's just a translation of I would say, all we have discussed before. Again, we have a rapidly growing, new therapeutical modality. There is confirmation on the field. There is improvement seen. We know that there is room for, new generations. And again, there is a lot of attractions. And I think that all those major, oncology players should have at least, an ADC platform in their approach. And of course, on the biotech side, there is, room for a lot of approaches, and we are very confident on our own platform and technology, of course.
I was just going to say, where does your company go from here, I guess?
So if it's more about, the company's ambition, I think that this one we can share also very transparently. Our ambition is really to build a pipeline of novel antibody-drug conjugates with the potential to transform the paradigm in solid tumors, of course. But we are also, of course, open to partnership. And so we really intend to have, both approach for the foreseeable future.
Another really interesting topic and guest this week, I hope you'll agree, but that's it for the podcast for another week. While I know what the subject of next week's is, the interview is not done yet, so I should probably go and get that organised. So thanks a lot for joining us, and I hope that wherever in the world you are, you have a great week ahead. Take care, and you'll join us next time for another Beyond Biotech.